Welcome to the 2022 Virginia Festival of the Book, presenting Reading Under the Influence, A Woman's Place is in the Brewhouse, with Tara Nurin. I'm Sarah Lawson, Associate Director of the Virginia Center for the Book, a program of Virginia Humanities. Thanks for joining us. A couple notes before we begin. Please share your questions for the author using the Q&A tab on Zoom. Also, this event has optional closed captioning, which you can turn on and customize at any time with the tab at the bottom of your window. If you haven't already read today's book, we hope you will. For details about how to buy it from a local bookseller, visit vabook.org, where you can also explore the schedule of upcoming festival programs and watch past events. While you're there, please consider making a donation to support the festival's ongoing work at vabook.org/give. Thanks to our sponsor for this annual event, W. Tucker Lemon, Virginia Humanities board member and advocate for reading under the influence. Thanks also to our community partner for this event, Devils Backbone Brewing Co, and our bookseller, Fountain Bookstore in Richmond, Virginia. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers. Tara Nurin, author of A Woman's Place is in the Brewhouse, is passionate about promoting women's challenges and achievements and the history of women in beer. Tara is also a veteran freelance journalist and beer and spirits contributor for Forbes, an educator, and a marketing consultant. And Libby Roether is Innovation Brewmaster at Devils Backbone Brewing Co. She discovered brewing while studying operations at Miami University and then the VLB in Berlin, Germany. Going on to work at 5 different breweries over 2 continents, she currently heads the Bounce Box Brewing program at Devils Backbone. Thank you both for joining us. Tara, Libby, take it away.
All right, so we already got quite the intro from Sarah. So Tara and I will be hosting Reading Under the Influence. So throughout the event, we will be going through 4 different beers for tastings. And while we're sipping away, we will talk with Tara about her book. So Sarah already mentioned, Tara Niren is author of A Woman's Place is in the Brewhouse, A Forgotten History of Alewives, Brewsters, Witches, and CEOs. Just a quick tie-in. So Tara is actually really closely related with Virginia because she had her first job out of grad school and worked as a reporter for WVIR under longtime news director and anchor Dave Cupp. So if she looks familiar, that might be one of the many reasons why. And so Tara, can you just provide a brief overview of your book to give a little bit of context for our conversation? And then I think Tara's going to kick off the event with a reading from her book as well.
That's right. Thanks, Libby. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to be joining people from Charlottesville and Albemarle County. So a little tiny bit about me in addition to Libby's great introduction. People always want to know how it is that I came to write this book. And basically, I've been writing about beer as a freelance journalist since 2005 in the Philadelphia metro area. And I've been really focusing on women in beer that entire time, gotten involved in a lot of different women's organizations in the beer space, started 1 or 2 of my own, and published this book last year, a couple months ago, about 6 months ago now. And the background to the book is that this is the first book to chronicle the history of women in beer. And women actually have been brewing beer, or some semblance thereof, for probably about 200,000 years. Basically, throughout most of human history, water was either not safe to drink or was believed to be not safe to drink. People didn't drink soda. Soda wasn't invented. Juice wasn't invented. People didn't drink milk. Wine tended to be for the upper classes. So beer has been the staple beverage for the family in most civilizations throughout human history. And because of that, it was a kitchen chore. And who is usually in charge of kitchen chores? Women. What has happened with stunning regularity is that in every single civilization throughout time and space, you'd have women being the brewers, and then one of three forces, sometimes all three at the same time, would come in and replace the women with men, and those would be politics, religion, or economics. So if you're scratching your head thinking, I didn't know women were involved in beer, or I didn't know women liked beer, women are the original brewmasters. And so that's a lead in to the book, a bit of a setup. I will be reading a quick little snippet from the chapter about colonial America, and Virginia and the Chesapeake colonies specifically. A little admission here is that I'm going to be reading off a PDF for the first time, so you might have to bear with me a little bit as I scroll down, and it doesn't always scroll as quickly as I am, but I think we'll be okay. So if you've got the book, you can follow along. I am skipping a bit, so you know, it might not be as easy to follow along as you may think. Anyway, so here we go. Virginia colonists brewed their first beer in 1584, almost 30 years before the founding of Jamestown. And I just want to interject with a fun fact. If you go to one of the two Jamestown sites, there's actually they're actually the remnants of a home, and there's a plaque there that gives the name of the woman who owned the home and says that she actually brewed there, which was shocking to me because normally history does not recognize that.
Wow.
So fun fact. So malting barley didn't grow well on much of the East Coast at the time, and Virginians were too preoccupied with their tobacco fields anyway. Women in the tobacco colonies of Virginia, Maryland, and a bit of North Carolina tended to replace hops in that case, hops and barley, replace them with spruce, birch, molasses, sassafras, pumpkin, parsnip, walnut chips, dried and baked persimmon, Jerusalem artichoke, and a lot of flint corn. Southern colonists, however, primarily slaked their thirst for alcohol with apple cider and brandy. As you know, being Virginians, apples grow very well, much better than the ingredients for beer do. When they did want beer, wives of middling income farmers purchased ingredients from larger farms, and they relied on their husbands, kids, and enslaved women and men for brewing help. Wives of large-scale farmers sometimes hired male servants and almost always employed slave labor. Beer and cider were the two beverages colonists literally couldn't live without. Sarah Hand Meacham writes, in a place where the water was unsafe, or at least believed to be, that's my parentheses, milk was generally unavailable, tea and coffee were too expensive for all but the very wealthy, and soda and non-alcoholic fruit juice were not yet invented, alcoholic beverages were all that colonists could drink safely. Some wealthy colonial women took a nip every day for their stamina, and women who couldn't afford spirits considered low alcohol beer and cider healthy daily drinks for the whole family. They and their enslaved people used them to treat everything from a runny nose to hysteria, and breastfeeding women drank hoppy beer to help their milk run. Beer was so critical to the functioning of the family that Meacham reports an Englishman named John Hammond severely castigated the Brewsters of Maryland and Virginia in 1656 for failing to make enough corn-based ale to meet the colony's needs. Calling these multitasking wives and mothers negligent, idle, careless, and slothful, he admonished, they will be judged by their drinks what kind of housewives they are. Great guy. So, as the wife of Thomas Jefferson, Martha Jefferson developed a reputation for brewing excellent wheat beer at their family's Monticello estate in Charlottesville, Virginia, where she oversaw a kitchen staffed by enslaved women and children, most notably longtime kitchen manager Ursula Granger. Martha prided herself on bargaining for ingredients, once writing that she'd bought 7 pounds of hops with an old shirt from enslaved people who grew hops in their own gardens. Eventually, an official hop garden was planted at Monticello, and the plantation's enslaved staff did the malting on site as well. That's it for the reading.
Thank you. Actually, when I went to Monticello, I was looking for the hops because hops are very hard to get rid of once they start growing. So, but I did not find them.
I have a picture. I believe that there might still be some there. I have a picture that Lee Grave, who some of our viewers might know, he wrote a couple books about brewing in or in Virginia in general, sent me a picture that he took somewhere at the estate, but I don't know where exactly. So I do believe they're still there, but I don't think they're like promoted or marked or anything. I think he did this blue thing.
Very cool though. Okay, I think we are going to start off with a beer. So hopefully all of you received your bounce box for the month. So you should have 4 different beers centered around women empowerment that came along with Tara's book. Just to give you a little intro on Bounce Box. Bounce Box is Devils Backbone's innovation program. So currently we're just creating 4 new beers every month. And then those beers are going directly to consumers. And we receive feedback on how all of these beers are and work to tweak them later on. So for this month, because of Tara's book and because of March 8th being International Women's Day, and with all of the Pink Boots collaboration, which you will hear more of, I'm sure, very shortly, we have 4 beers that are centered around women empowerment. So our first beer is called All Dolled Up, and I'm going to show you the can because the artwork is amazing.
I love the artwork on your cans, by the way. I'm having a great time looking at them.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give a quick shout out to Naya Moore. She's a local graphic designer out of Richmond, and she created all of the labels for these beers. So I did break down I think her Insta handle is just Naya Moore. So if you want to look her up, she is an amazing lady. This is All Dolled Up. And so you can see by the label, this is a beer that was kind of meant to break the stereotype of women having to look and dress like dolls. So we should be able to dress and express ourselves however we like. This is an Apertivo style Spritz ale. So I already broke into mine, but it is cheers, everybody. It is a hybrid ale, so that means that it was brewed and fermented half and half with barley and then also Pinot Grigio juice. So you can drink this like you would a champagne or a wine spritzer. And then it was conditioned on elderflower, lime, and mint. So very light, refreshing.
And as I said a minute ago,
a little bit of tartness, and that's the elderflower. Sorry?
No, I was just going to say, while you were taking a sip, that as I said a minute ago, I think it will go fabulously with Thai food later this evening. That's my pairing recommendation.
I can get into that, yeah. So while you enjoy your beverage, we'll keep talking about this book. And we already know that Tara is the wine or the spirits and beer contributor for Forbes. So I am just curious, is this kind of a niche subject to write about? So how did you get into writing about beer?
So after I did 2 years at Channel 29, I went on to the Memphis market, was a TV reporter, and then came to the Philly market. And in 2005, I left TV, started freelancing, and my biggest client was the Philadelphia Tourism Bureau. So in 2005, my strong belief was, and continues to be, that Philadelphia was the primary East Coast city for craft beer, which we called microbrews at the time. And working for the Tourism Bureau, I was writing a lot about these new breweries popping up, beer bars, etc. And I was getting advice that journalists should not be generalists. Journalists, it would behoove freelancers to pick a niche, basically. And so I developed a love for covering economic development when I was a reporter in Charlottesville. One of my beats was Fluvanna County, and I just loved covering, the changes that were happening to the county. And so I saw that breweries were and probably would continue to be amazing economic drivers for communities. And I
Yeah,
say
yeah.
probably because we didn't really know for sure at the time, but yes, they have become that,
Mhm.
those. And so I basically decided right time, right place, right gender. You know, I was one of only maybe 2 to 5 women writing about beer regularly at the time in the country. And yeah, so, and I also really loved just the communal aspect of beer and how eco-conscious most brewers were at the time, and
Yeah.
happily do still continue to be. So yeah, and because I've been a lifelong feminist, combining women with beer, giving coverage, exposure to the few women who were in beer at the time, there were not quite so many as there are now,
Yeah.
seemed like a really natural fit.
Yeah, I'm reading about all of the women. Yeah, it was so few, and I feel like there's so few now, but I can't imagine like not even knowing if there was another woman brewer at all and then finding one. Very, very, very cool.
Well, you know, as I say, sometimes it took me a couple years to write the proposal and then get a publisher. And had the book actually been written a couple years earlier, it would have been completely different. And one of the main reasons for that is that there were really only a handful of women who were known in the industry at that time. And so they would have been very prominent in the book. And then by the time I actually did write it in about 2020, some of those women didn't end up actually even making the book at all because there were so many more to cover.
Wow.
So it's really just this amazing
That's
progress
interesting.
that happened very, very fast.
That's really good to hear. Maybe not for the lady who didn't make it in the book.
Right, I know. That's the one thing I still lose sleep over actually in the book is the women who really, you know, who, all the thousands of women who really deserved to be in there. But in 300 words and 200,000 years is only so much space.
Oh yeah. So how did you actually get started writing the book, and like what pushed you originally to be the first author of a book about women in beer?
So you mentioned the collaboration brew days. Those are an outgrowth of an organization called the Pink Boot Society, which is an international 501c3 devoted toward providing networking, empowerment, and education for women who work in the alcoholic beverage space. It was started as an organization for beer women. The founder of that is a mentor of mine, and she actually wrote the foreword. Her name is Terry Ferendorf. Her name is very small here on the cover. And she and I were on the phone one day in about 2015 or 2016, and she said, Tara, no one's written a book about the history of women in beer, and you need to write it. You're the one. And Terry loves to joke about herself that she loves to tell people what to do. So she told me, and she had given me some great ambitious ideas prior to that I was kind of too intimidated to pursue. That it wasn't really the right time. But with this, I thought, you know, a lot of people write books and they're not even professional writers. I bet I could actually do this. And so that's what I did. And I'm eternally grateful to her for giving me the idea. It's really, it was absolutely a book that needed to be written.
Yes, it was. I'm very thankful for it. I love it.
Thanks.
Well, we could move on to our next beer. Everyone has to be drinking quickly here.
I thought about bringing a little dump bucket over here, but then decided, nah, I can finish.
Yeah, I don't think I could do it. I do have my little dump bucket over here.
Do you? You were more prepared than I was.
So our next beer we're going to move on to is called Bomb Ass Queen, or BAQ, and it is a pale ale. Let me just hold this up for you here. So bomb ass queen and dry hopped with a hop called African Queen. And it gives a lot of like orange and floral candied notes. So perfectly fitting because Tara writes a lot about many bomb ass queens in her book.
And there are various sections in the book about brewing in Africa, both in ancient times and traditional brewing. And today there are some really incredible women running breweries, craft breweries in Africa. So that's a fun tie into the beer. I can't wait to try it.
Is there anything that you would, I know we only have so much time, but is there anything that you would tie in? Because I think that's really interesting. The women who are kind of bringing back in African countries, they're bringing back like older traditions, and they're talking about like how it's something that they've always done and are still doing. Is there anything that you would touch on with that?
Well, like you're saying, I mean, so basically the way beer is made in Africa, you've got these huge multinational corporations, and then you've got village women who have been brewing for generations, very small scale cottage industries. They basically like sell the beer out their front door. Generally it's the men who drink it, and they tend to pass it around in these communal vessels for, you know, not even pennies, right? And it is a skill passed down matrilineally, but in the past generation or two, it's just not really cool anymore. Typically Africans drink, you know, the multinational beers, but there are craft breweries, like I said, popping back up, some run by women, and they tend to really highlight the traditional ingredients and the traditional styles, and produce them with commercial equipment that has never really been done before. And happily, those styles and ingredients are very slowly starting to find their way into some American craft beers. And I think that's a whole new frontier that we're going to start to see more of.
Very interesting. Thank you. So you should smell a little bit of like a candied orange, a little bit of floral. It's got like a pretty like full body, but it's cut by a light acidity. Nice gold color.
I don't know if I've ever had a single hopped beer with African Queen. This is cool.
This is my first one too. So yeah, I'm getting to try many different types of beers for the first time because we are always making so many new beers. So I get to try out a lot of different ingredients.
So you actually run the innovation program at Devils Backbone. Am I correct about that?
I would not say the full innovation program, but I do run the brewery.
Okay.
So yeah, we have a small 10 hectoliter system, and we work on all different types of beers. We do 4 different beers every month. We're starting to work on like making beers for scale and trialing out beers that way. We're starting to get more into the beyond beer realm, ciders, agave wine, that type of thing. So a lot of fun stuff. Small team, but very good team. So I want to move back into a little bit more about Monticello in Virginia. So you had mentioned the term Archival Silences, and it's actually the first time I had heard of that term when reading this book. And you also mentioned the word her story, which is very fitting for this book as well. Would you mind explaining to our audience what those 2 words mean?
Sure. So her story is a word that people use sometimes because if you're really into it, write down the word history,
Yeah.
or at least visualize it, picture it in your head. It's his story, right? So we don't want to perpetuate sexism in our language. So sometimes I do use the term her story instead.
Mhm.
So what that leads into is this concept of archival silences. And typically only the stories of the dominant population in a society get written down. In the case of women, historically, they've been illiterate, so they couldn't even write their own stories down, but they couldn't own property in many places at many times. So business records didn't even mention their names. If they did, they would be called like Mrs. Joe Smith or the wife of Joe Smith, even in obituaries and such. So it's really, really hard to do research on non-dominant populations, and that's what this concept of archival silences is. Also, women's work wasn't necessarily considered interesting enough to be chronicled by historians, throughout history. And, we're talking about women primarily in this conversation, but the same thing can be said about, populations of color, gender non-conforming people. And so when you're trying to find the histories of these groups of people now, it's extraordinarily difficult. And so that's what an archival silence is. And I really encountered that to my chagrin in researching the book in a lot of different ways. But a couple of the ways are that I would have heard these sort of stories, these general stories about women in brewing throughout the years, but then I would go and try to like find examples or find proof, and I just couldn't find anything. It's just not there. And one of the places where that happened the most, and something that I really want to look into more, that I wish I could have found more about to put more about in the book, is the history of African American women brewing. We know a tiny bit about enslaved women brewing. I mentioned Ursula Granger. But when you've got this intersectionality of like multiple non-dominant populations, it gets even harder. So it's really amazing that, in modern times, we have so many more females, people of color, etc., who are doing the work of finding these histories and then writing them down, both from the past and in the present. So hopefully moving forward, it will become a bit easier.
Did you have a lot of resources and people who were able to help you find some of these sources?
Yeah. There is a whole topic that I was never able to find anybody to talk to me about, and that's basically women who would be like our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, great-great-grandmothers in the United States homebrewing, like throughout Prohibition.
Yeah.
Occasionally, I would hear that women did brew secretly at home through the 19th and 20th centuries. Every once in a while, I'll run into somebody who will say like, oh yeah, my great-grandmother brewed at home, or she ran a secret tavern out of our basement or something. But a lot of times those stories died with those people, and I wasn't able to find anything concrete to put in the book. Still working on it. If anybody has any of those stories, I would like to hear them.
Yeah, I only know, I think it was just my great grandfather. That was, he would have been brewing around that time too. But yeah, so if anyone has someone, post it in the chat. And if you have any questions that you want to ask Tara, we'll take questions at the end, but if you have any now, feel free to start posting them.
Yeah, and I don't actually have my chat open because of the way I have to set my screen up for this, but Libby, if you want to call anything out, and I can try to open the chat in a little bit.
I know you've given quite a few presentations about brewing and alcohol production in historical Virginia. You presented on them in colonial Williamsburg. I know you already talked about that, but I know you have more that you can touch on if there's anything else about Ursula or just alcohol production in general in Virginia.
Well, I was super excited when you told me that you brought your staff to see the brewing exhibition at Monticello.
Yes, I did. I read the book and then it's like, we have to go. Martha was very involved in beer. So I brought my team over to see it. And I have to imagine there was more there at the time. But yeah, it was really cool. They have like all of the barrels and all of the bottling equipment still there. And they mentioned a little bit about like some of the slaves that would have been helping out, and Peter Hemmings, and he was like one of the, I think he was, well, you would know better than I would, but I think he was running a lot of the cider production there. So it was pretty cool to actually get to read it and then go and see it, and we're literally right there. So
I haven't been able to go myself because of COVID, but I have seen pictures, and it's nice that they do have a bit of information devoted to brewing. And from what I can see, it's like some vessels stuck in a corner of the kitchen or something, right?
Yeah.
It's not entirely inaccurate though. Martha and Mr. Jefferson and Martha, I was schooled well when I lived in Charlottesville. That's what we call him, right? When they drew up plans for Monticello, they included a brewing area in the basement along with like a rum storage cellar, which I thought was pretty cool. It's not clear whether those were ever built. For a lot of Monticello's lifespan, the brewing would have probably just been done in the kitchen, maybe a corner or something of it was devoted to it, maybe aging, storing cider. More cider was happening than beer for most of Monticello's active existence. But it probably would have just been, some stuff in a corner with some storage in a closet in a basement or something. Martha, however, was a very prolific brewer. She brewed great wheat beers, I think I wrote, but she died young. And her daughter, also Martha, as an adult, would help out Mr. Jefferson when he was away once in a while. There's correspondence from him saying, all the corks have blown on the cider. They were terrible corks. Can you get me better ones in Boston? But can you go there and figure it out? Or so-and-so who holds the keys to the storage cellar is sick. So can you go, open the storage cellar or something? Once he retired, he got very much more actively interested and involved in brewing, and he finally did build a brewery and a malting facility. And at that point he had Peter Hemmings, who was one of his favorite enslaved people, brother to James Hemmings and Sally Hemmings. He had him trained in brewing, and he was such a great brewer, according to the president's correspondences, that he would invite other statesmen to send their people to get trained by Peter in brewing. And one of those people was actually James Madison. So
wow, that's very cool. That's how I was not remembering that correctly. So thank you for clearing that up. We have to move on to our next beer.
Moving on.
Okay, our next one, we are going to do Equal Pay Cold IPA. So we have on the can, women earn 82 cents for every dollar a man earns, and women earn less than men in nearly all occupations. And this is the beer that's the collaboration with the Pink Boots Society. So every year, the Pink Boots Society creates a blend, and then breweries can do a collaboration brew with with pink boots and use the hops in their beers. So if you're not familiar with the style Cold IPA, the way that we brewed it was we created a more of a lighter base IPA, and then we fermented it with lager yeast, but we let it rise to hit a pretty warm temperature. And usually you're fermenting your lagers relatively cold. So that's what makes this a cold IPA.
I have to admit, this might be the first cold IPA I've had. I definitely haven't had more than 3, so I'm excited to try this. It's a brand new hot style. It's
a pretty new style. This is probably only my 3rd one.
Okay.
I'm going to be trying more of the styles that I'm making. You might taste or smell like some mango, maybe a little bit of pine if you've ever used some spruce in your beer, like some of the women back in the day. Maybe a little bit of bubble gum. All right.
Speaking of equal pay, I quote a contemporary woman in the book who recalls a conversation she had with her mother when she finds out that her mom couldn't co-sign for the mortgage on her house.
I remember reading that. Yeah.
Remember? And I think it was the 60s, because at the time, until the 70s, and it's actually because of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I'm seeing some reference to her again, women couldn't hold credit cards in their name.
Amazing.
And so that trickled down into other legal and financial contracts. But yeah, they couldn't. I didn't know that until I wrote the book. It was like 1973-ish. Women couldn't have their own credit cards.
It was not that long ago. I didn't know that until I read the book. So it's crazy. It took me a minute to grasp that. But it's still happening today, equal pay, so still big issue. And so we are having an event next week, just a little tie-in here, and we're going to do the equal pay will be released on draft at the Outpost tap room in Lexington. And so every $1 for every pint that we sell is going to go to the Pink Boot Society. And then if you are a woman or you identify as a woman, you'll receive 18% or 12%, 18% discount on your bill to kind of accommodate for the pay gap. So I hope that you would join us for our little event.
I love that idea. That's so good. Did you tell the press about that? That seems like something some of the press might be interested in because of that.
No, we didn't. But I hope that people can make it. So if you're free, come have a beer. I do want to talk about Bamberg because Bamberg, Germany, when I was reading that, and I must have just missed you because I was living in Germany just after you had visited. So you talk about your time in Bamberg and visiting Bayerman. If you're not familiar with Bayerman, they're a malting company and they're very, very well known throughout the brewing industry. They make amazing malts. But Sabine Bayerman, along with Thomas Cross Bayerman, they run the malt factory there. And I had a really, really amazing opportunity that Sabine offered for me to work there as a visiting brewer. And I was able to work there for 6 months, and she focused it on education. So I was there to mostly learn. And so I know you mentioned this a little bit in your book, and Sabine, she has really kind of kickstarted the craft industry on getting their malt widely available to a lot of the American craft breweries. So it's pretty cool. And she was very, very kind and generous to me while I was there. And I saw that reflected in your book as well. So if you want to talk about that, your time in Germany and maybe your time with Sister Doris as well, because that's also an amazing story.
So yeah, Weyermann malt is, I would say, arguably the most revered specialty malt in the world. I cannot go to a brewery in any country and not see bags of it all over the place. And Sabine is the fifth generation owner, first female. And while I was there visiting, I had the opportunity to meet with other female brewers and brewery owners who were the first generation to the first women in a long line of brewers and brewery owners in their family. For instance, the Meinl sisters I visited while I was there in Bamberg. They're nearby elsewhere in Bavaria. They are 11th generation, I think, 11th or 12th generation owners of this family brewery. And they're the first females to run it. And brewing, as you know, Libby, in Germany is super traditional.
Yeah, very traditional.
You know, we don't have this stereotype of the burly German brewer for nothing. I mean, that's what it's been until now. So I was just gonna say, so I had time to kill in Europe, which sounds really snooty, but I actually did. So I was really happy to have the opportunity. I took a side trip to Bamberg, which has the distinction of being the world's capital of smoked beer. As I'm sure you had a lot of, maybe Libby, when you were there. So I went because I really wanted Sabine in the book. And it just so happened that my dear friend, Denise Jones, who's also in the book, was working as a distiller there at the time. So I went and, did this long interview with Sabine. She's lovely. And she lent us the company car. So Denise and I went with another Weyermann employee, the only one of the three of us who spoke any German, and met all these female brewers in Bavaria and went to see Sister Doris, who is the last in 1,000 or so year line of German brewing nuns. She might even be the last one in all of Europe. So, we think of monks in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, et cetera, brewing. Well, nuns have been there right alongside them all through Central and Western Europe. There's actually a very famous brewing nun from around the year 1100 or so from Germany. And so there's been this line for 1,000 years, and Sister Doris is it. And she's, I guess, probably in her 70s by now, and she works at the Abbey. Her brewing equipment is from the 60s. I think her newest equipment is from the 1980s. I should specify at least 1980s. And whatever the other nuns at the Abbey don't drink, she sells in order to sustain her own brewing operations. And she does floor malting, which is the old traditional way of malting. And now she does have one assistant finally, and he's a guy.
Okay.
And when she decides to retire, there's not really anybody else at the moment to step in. So, the people watching this she's gotten tons and tons and tons of international press. So she's kind of famous in the brewing world, but yeah, she's it. But anyway, I wouldn't have been able to go meet her and interview her if it hadn't been for Sabine's generosity. And Gregor, the guy who spoke the English, was the one who translated. And Sister Doris cooked us lunch, and we sat in her little apartment in the brewery. It was so cool. Did you get a chance to meet her when you were there?
No, I didn't. Oh, I'm jealous.
So the Pink Boots Society does, well, before COVID, they were running these annual trips to Germany, and that was like a a stop every year. They would bring all these female brewers to go meet her, see her operations and such. And she loves it. She loves the attention. Her beer's amazing.
I love when she was saying that she hopes that the other nuns don't drink too much beer so that she can still sell them.
I think the rule at that abbey, it's Mallersdorf Abbey. I think the nuns can drink whatever they want at lunchtime, and I think they can take two bottles home a day for personal consumption. Right, and so that's why Sister Doris was like, I hope they don't drink too much because I need to sell some.
Yeah, so funny. All right. Well, it's already almost a quarter till. I don't know if anyone in the audience, if we want to open it up to the audience, if anybody has any questions, you can just post it in the chat. Otherwise, we will just keep sipping on some beers and, we have some.
Oh, more on Sister Doris. Great job, Sarah. You're on it.
It's awesome.
Q&A. Here we go. We have somebody tuning in from Chicago. Do you want to read the question out loud?
Yeah, sorry. It says, I don't want to steal the focus from Virginia, but I'm tuning in from Chicago, learned about this event through the Chicago Reader newsletter. I'm waiting for my hold at the library, so I haven't read the book yet, but do you have any fun stories about brewers in Chicago?
Yes. I do, as a matter of fact, and I need to be mindful of the timer. I could talk about it forever. So I went to grad school at Northwestern in Chicago.
Yeah.
And when I got there, I couldn't understand why Evanston had been a dry town until
that's right,
almost when I was there. I'd never heard of a dry town before. I'm from Maryland. We don't have those things. And so it turns out that pretty much the seat of the temperance movement is Evanston, Illinois. And so I guess the question is, do I have any fun stories about brewers in Illinois? No, I have some unfun stories about not drinking in the Chicago area. Frances Willard was head of the Women's Christian Temperance Union for decades, and that's where she was based, hence the Evanston connection. My publisher is Chicago Review Press in Chicago. But you know what, as far as like contemporary brewers in Chicago, one of the women, I actually can't think of any stories about brewing women in Chicago, but there is a woman who should have been in the book, and like we said, couldn't, there wasn't space for her. Her name is Avery. And she, do you know Avery, Libby? She was a brewer at Jester King in Austin, Texas for a long time, and such a killer brewery. And so when she moved up to Chicago to start her own thing, she really has garnered a lot of attention for herself. And right now I'm only saying her first name because of course I'm blanking on her last name. But yeah, if you're interested, just type in Avery Brewer Chicago and she'll come up. I do plan to do an event at Temperance Brewing in Evanston.
Okay, cool.
Probably this spring. So definitely some Chicago ties. Maybe not exactly answers you were asking about, but yeah, a lot of the history of temperance is centered around that area.
No, it was interesting to hear about the temperance, or to actually read about the temperance movement, because I was like, you got to see all of the different perspectives and things that I hadn't thought of before. So
well, it's kind of wild, you know. It was weird for me researching and writing the sections on temperance and prohibition because, you know, I come from the alcohol world, like prohibition, bad, right? Carry Nation, bad. But I really developed a lot of kind of empathy and understanding for the women involved in the temperance movement. You know, they had their very legitimate reasons for wanting to cut back on drinking at that time. And in some ways they failed massively, and in some ways they really did succeed. And we're still, Libby, as you know, like grappling with the impacts of prohibition today. I mean, a lot of the rules that govern like sales and distribution and even production of home brewing in this country are still prohibition era laws.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question. One is from my mom, so skip that one.
Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom. Is there any, so we have another question. Is there any organized effort in the industry to promote women and minorities into brewing positions? And what do you believe needs to be done? Thanks. This is a really entertaining session. And this is from Tom.
Thank you, Tom. That's a great question. As you can tell, I have long answers for everything, so I will try to keep this one concise because there's so much I could say. Yeah, so I would say that, well, first of all, people of color are vastly underrepresented in brewing. I mean, there are about 9,000 breweries now, and I think the tally of Black-owned breweries is at about 80 in the US. Since the George Floyd protests, luckily, happily, there's been a lot more attention paid to the issue. You know, there's been a really big collaboration brew effort called Black is Beautiful, and thousands of breweries around the country brewed this beer called Black is Beautiful, donated the proceeds to organizations, you know, working in Black communities around the country. There are women, a colleague of mine, Eugenia Brown, she goes by Black Beer Chick on Instagram. She has raised money to fund scholarships for women of color to join the Pink Boots Society and women of color to take their Cicerone exams. The Cicerone exam is the beer equivalent of a sommelier exam. When the Cicerone organization found out that she was doing this, they matched her. They matched everything she'd raised, and they are continuing to do that. There's an organization called Beer Culture with a K, and they have partnered with breweries and universities around the country to fund scholarships for people of color. There's a really high profile scholarship started by Garrett Oliver, who is the longtime master brewer at Brooklyn Brewery, and he is one of the first Black brewers in the country. He's super famous in the beer world. He has spearheaded a very big brewing and distilling scholarship for people of color. I could go on and on. And there is, I will give a shout out to something called the Barrel and Flow Fest, which is going into, I'm going to say like its 5th year in Pittsburgh. It's a beer festival and conference that also showcases art and music. Primarily Black performers, entrepreneurs, and brewers, and brings Black beer lovers from around the country and white beer lovers too, beer lovers of all stripes. But it's the first festival that really is focused on the Black brewer, the Black artist, the Black beer drinker. What more needs to be done? A lot. A lot more outreach to get Black people or people of color more into the pipeline for brewing jobs. More needs to be done to actively invite communities of color into the brewing space so that they feel invited and welcome. Partnerships worked out with organizations who work in the various communities to, again, you know, breweries, craft breweries position themselves as like community spaces, right? But there are a lot of communities who don't feel like it's their community. So a lot more outreach there. And the last thing that I will say about this is one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about is that the Me Too movement came to beer last May. And that really has changed a lot for women in the brewing industry. But part of what came along with that is a lot of just general workplace abuse was brought to light. And so as a result, savvy breweries, not all the breweries, but savvy breweries have really started to examine how they're treating their employees, basically, and making themselves more professional by bringing in HR experts, creating HR departments for the first time. And so I think between that and George Floyd and the other stuff that I'm talking about, it's all slowly but happening. It's all coalescing, I think, to make the experience of working in the beer world more healthier for people who are not part of the dominant white male population.
Yeah.
Long answer. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. So much to say.
That's good. We're already wrapping up. It is almost 9 o'clock. So time flew. This is why you have to get the book so that you can hear more about all of these cool stories. My mom had a question here about witches and beer. So if you want to know more about that, definitely pick up the book. It is fascinating. So you can purchase the book in a few different places. You're also still able to purchase the book. And if you're still interested in the beers, you can go to bouncebox.beer and you're still able to buy all 4 beers along with Tara's book. You can also go to bookshop.org and you can purchase the book there and they'll be able to send it to your local bookstore. And that about wraps everything up for us. So thank you very much, Tara. It was a pleasure to be able to talk with you and have you here. And please consider buying these featured books from your local bookseller. And vabook.org, they will provide you some of the links that you can get these books. And I think that's about it. But unfortunately, we didn't get to have our last beer. So if we don't want to rush through it, it is the Suffragette Sour as a blueberry pastry sour. And Sarah, what were you going to say?
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but there was a question that came in about it, which was, what about the last beer? And I think Sarah won't be upset if we do the last beer.
Okay, then we will go to the last beer. Oh, everyone has to drink very quickly. A lot of beers for 1 hour. This is Suffragette Sour. So here's the can. And it is a blueberry pastry sour. And the base of this beer is I brewed it with darker malts, so Munich and Vienna, and that was to kind of give the like a more of a graham cracker or blueberry crumble kind of flavor without actually adding graham cracker. And then we fermented it with over 500 pounds of blueberries and lactose, vanilla, cinnamon, so it should taste like a dessert.
Is there lactobacillus in here too, or no?
There is not actually.
Okay, I thought
we did use just a regular ale yeast that does produce lactic acid, but it is not lactobacillus.
Okay. What a beautiful pour.
There you have it. Now you can go pick up the book and enjoy your beer. So thank you everyone for having us and hopefully we'll talk soon. Okay.
Thank you, Libby.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
everyone.
You.